past year, I've had a relationship with Sasha Havlicek that's pretty much dictated by this 8-hour time difference. And one of us has to either get up really early or stay up really late. So as I've traveled around the world, her work as the CEO of the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, the global think and action tank, has become what many people have now know and respect. Sasha is what we need. She's an innovator, a pioneer in the search for real-world solutions to intercommunal conflict, extremism, and terrorism. You undoubtedly heard about her efforts to spearhead the largest global network of former extremists in partnership with Google's Jigsaw, the Strong Cities Network, the first global counter-extremism network, and the Innovation Hub, a partnership with Facebook, Google, and Twitter to counter extremist online strategies. Sasha chairs the 11-country policy planners network on countering radicalization, and she co-chaired the EU's Internet Radicalization Working Group for 3 years. We could think of no better person to moderate the next session as a result of her most recent achievement when she joined Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg in the launching of the Online Civil Courage Initiative designed to amplify efforts to counter hate speech online. Please join me in welcoming Sasha Havlicek and the distinguished panels of our next session.
A very warm welcome to our session. I have to say I'm sitting here in a sort of moral dilemma because I come from a place where we get very little exposure to the sunshine, and there it is, tantalizingly sitting outside the door. And yet here we are. But it is an incredible panel that we have here, and I'm very, very grateful to Errol for putting together not just amazing speakers, but an amazing audience. Now, I know that we've got some wonderful tech here and everybody is talking to each other on these, but I'm going to dispense with that and start with a couple of questions of my own, if I could, to the audience. You can't see this, can you? No. Can I read you a quote? And I'd be grateful if anybody in the audience can tell me if they know whose it is. It is obvious that the media war in this century is one of the strongest methods. In fact, its ratio may reach 90% of the total preparation for battles. Any takers?
It's not Donald Trump.
William Randolph Hearst, interesting. Any other takers? Come on, somebody. I think I even flashed this. I told you, Jemana. Go on, tell us who it is. So, Osama bin Laden in 2002. I raise this just to say the investment that extremist groups have been making in narrative, in the media battle, in the information warfare space has been sizable, and it predates the social media era. Now, in many ways, this has come to the fore for us because of ISIS's grueling and very successful social media campaigning. But I just want to put this into a wider, longer-term perspective on that side of the aisle, if you like. I have another question. Everybody will recall the absolutely horrific attacks in Paris that took place in November of 2015. Can anybody tell me what happened the day before that attack? Another attack. Any recollection? There was a terrifying, very, very major terrorist attack that took place in Beirut the day before. The Paris attack received 17 times the media coverage of the Beirut attack the day before. I say this because the narrative, the wider meta-narrative, if you like, around these issues, again, isn't just happening in the social media space. There is a backdrop against which we see and understand these problems, and I think it's important to remember it. Another question. This is I'm testing the audience just to get us started on it, because we're before lunch, and I know that everybody's slightly fading, so I'm putting you on the spot. Where do you think you could most readily find a full, unedited, uncontextualized version of one of ISIS's most brutal propaganda videos. That is the immolation of the Jordanian pilot that you will all recall. Where could that be most readily accessed for a long period of time? Any thoughts? YouTube, everybody's saying YouTube.
Fox News, right?
Fox News.
Yep.
Yes, well done.
I know my terrorists.
I knew there was a reason. We needed to bring movement on this. He knows his terrorists. Again, I raise this because mainstream media has played an interesting role in this space, a variable role around the world. But interestingly, it was Fox News that probably provided that piece of propaganda to the world for longer than any other channel. You can equally find other unedited ISIS propaganda on Chinese mainstream media sites, and a whole array of other national media sites that use that type of content in a counter-propaganda context. Interesting. Counter-propaganda, mobilizing their own people against ISIS, but using ISIS propaganda. Feeding a narrative. We'll ask which narrative soon. Last question, I promise this is enough, but what do you think the proportion of far-right, white supremacist, or counter-government terrorist attacks has been in the United States vis-a-vis other attacks since 9/11? And I'm saying this in the context of attacks that have resulted in fatalities. What is that proportion, do you think? Any takers? Any guesses, shouting out. 5 to 1, 3 to 1. 20 to 1. Interesting. Yes, so 73%. I wonder, does anybody feel that that's reflected in the narrative, in the wider media narrative? So that's a start to our session. I want to say, since 2006, I have been working with my incredible team at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue to innovate, to trial, to see what types of responses could possibly work in addressing the tidal challenges of rising extremisms of all ideological variants. We had the enormous privilege of bringing together many of the speakers that we heard before, Tony, Angela, Mubin, others, and spearheading an initiative that taught us an enormous amount about the commonalities, the common threads, in terms of the personal trajectories of those that radicalize and are recruited into extremist groups and that ultimately also leave them. And we started to build programs that could learn from these different experiences in both the offline and in the online world, understanding increasingly that national level policy responses could never do the job on their own, that we needed local responses as well through the Strong Cities Network, through our work with amazing leaders in this space, LA, Jomana sitting here, who drives this process here, other cities around the world, where we're starting painstakingly to build out the infrastructure that we need, community by community, between municipal actors, parents, teachers, social services, health services, and law enforcement, so that we can start to create the sort of infrastructure needed to both spot and respond. And increasingly, as we've seen the challenge migrate first into the online space, and then progressively into mainstream social media, and now well beyond, migrating off to all sorts of smaller platforms, and utilizing all sorts of technologies. And we do see extremists be early adopters of technology, early adopters of communication strategies. And as the Osama bin Laden quote, I think, highlights, and as ISIS's media strategies highlight after that, and as the far-right ideologues who are ever more strategic in their social media endeavors highlight, there is a huge investment being made. This is not a set of organic bubbling movements. There is a huge investment being made to make a play for the center of gravity of communities around the world, to pull them into extremist camps, and to mobilize cumulative extremisms. And so we have an extraordinary panel here today to look at what can we do? What has been done that's effective? How can we do more of that? What is still missing? And how can we, as a community, do more to mobilize an effective response? So I am delighted to introduce my dear friends. So I have on my right here Adnan Kifayat, who leads the security ventures at a wonderful organization called the Gen Next Foundation. And prior to that was the US Special Representative to Muslim communities worldwide at State, and worked very closely with our dear friend Farah Pandith, who was the first ever Muslim representative to Muslim communities worldwide at the State Department. Mubin, you've already met, who is a leader and a founder of the Against Violent Extremism Network and does extraordinary work. Now, Mohamed has become a dear friend, and I've had the privilege of working with him. He is a community activist, a pioneer, a very brave person who's mounted some of the most important positive narrative campaigns work within the United States. And I'm excited because you're going to tell us a little bit about your work as a whole, but also one of your most recent endeavors. And then I hope we'll have a chance to watch that. Are we getting a chance to watch that?
Yes.
Yes? Fantastic. But I first wanted just to ask you, Mohamed, you've heard a little bit from this morning's session, some of the challenges that people have identified working in this space. You've overcome many of these and you've done extraordinary important work. Can you tell me a little bit about what was it that drove you to do it? What is it that you've created? And then just tell us, what is it that you feel you need from this audience to achieve what you need to be doing?
First of all, I want to say thank you. Sasha and I worked before, and she helped me. I want to thank Errol Southers personally. You see, I was doing this work on my own, trying to create counter-narratives, and then Errol Southers comes into my life and he says, I got to structure you. You know, this is what academicians do with the Sol Prize. And he says, Mohamed, you got to be a non-profit. I say, dude, I'm from the for-profit world. What is a non-profit? You know? And then he said, I'm going to be on your board and I'm going to structure you and you're going to create something which will last for a long time. So Sol Prize School has been at the birth of my process. And until now, to getting invited to this, I don't do this often. I feel it's a waste of time. But but what happens is Errol Southers comes to my community and he says, I want to talk to the community. I say, oh, what the hell? All the other researchers just paraphrase each other and they pay for people to do the research. You want to talk to the people? I said, yeah, you want to talk to the people? I took him to the mosques. I took him to the cab drivers where they sit down for coffee. I took him to the schools. I took him to the madrasa, the mosques, and everywhere. And out of it came a research paper. And I said, I can do this, you know? I'm an average Mohamed, that's my organization. What drove me to do this? 2007, 2008, Al-Shabaab forms. It's an Al-Qaeda affiliate in Somalia. It gets 15 kids from my community. My community is about 100,000, maximum. That was bad. ISIS comes along. This is Syria and Iraq. Somalia, we can get these as Somali kids. Maybe there's a local issue, you know, that drove them there. But then again, ISIS comes along and guess what? They pull kids out of my community. Now I'm mad. I'm mad because at the end of the day, I live in a society which is free. I came here as a refugee and I have everything I need. I have a house, a car full of, a mortgage, a car note. I'm in debt just like every other American, you know. I got 4 beautiful little kids who are getting a free education and healthcare. Now, what is wrong with these kids? And we said, okay, what can we do as a citizen? That's the thing, you know, that's missing from this conversation is what can we do as a citizen? We know what the government can do. Law enforcement, interdiction, extermination, or taking them out of circulation. But what can we do as a citizen? Well, we said, well, what is it that we know? Because every Muslim, at every attack says, well, this is not our Islam. This is not what majority Muslims believe in. I say, well, okay, so what are we doing promoting the majority Muslim view? That's where I come in. And I decided, let's go ahead and do this work and reach out to our kids. So I did some research and development. I made some videos. They really sucked. And then we came about to cartoons, and we found out cartoons is a natural medium. Kids are used to it. These are kids' generation, Simpsons and, God forbid, Family Guy, you know? So we say, let's use cartoons. And then we said, okay, let's start making 5-minute long storytelling cartoons. I took it to the kids, sampled it, and the kids said, Mohamed, this sucks. After 1 minute, you lost our attention. So I said, okay, start making messages with 1 minute long, 60 seconds to 120 seconds. And we got more traction on that. And we started taking on the issues. Basically, Ms. Rice said, we are stuck on stupid. I'll introduce you to another concept. It's called, it's ideology stupid. We can interdict, we can exterminate, but if the ideology is let alone and not unmolested, they can always recruit. That is where we come in. We create the messages, but what good is just creating the messages and just putting it out there? So we worked with ISD on a couple of messages. On one message, which was girls' rights, girls know best, which was about women's rights, because women's rights is human rights. Anybody with a brain can tell that. But then again, in extremist society, they don't believe in that. They believe they're either caretakers or cookers of food, not educators, not opportunity givers. So we made that message, and what, Lord and behold, with IST with us, we got over 500,000 views on Facebook alone. So there is a market for messaging. People are looking for social reinforcement. What is it we believe in? Why do we believe in this stuff? And then how do we go about creating it? That is online. The other objective we wanted to do is also, we said, okay, it's not just good enough putting this on social media. You have to actually go and talk to the kids. Now, I'm a talker. That comes easy to me. So I go out, I start going to the mosques, and I said, you got 250 kids in the after-school programs? Yes, I said, let me talk to them. They told me, go away, the first time. The second time, they came around and said, let me talk to your kids. They said, okay, we'll listen to you, but we have to talk to the parents. The third time, after the recruitment happened, they invited me. And that's happened in schools, that's happened in madrasas, which is Islamic schooling, and all over the place. Last year, I spoke to 16,072 kids, I keep count. 16,072 kids directly, where we take a message, whether it's our diversity, whether it's freedom of speech, or issues such as suicide bombing as an Islamic principle. We say plainly, they go to hell. Not based on my teachings or my saying, but on the teachings of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, meaning that this is what the majority Muslims believe in. As a Muslim, it's important we do it within dignity and within our culture. You got to speak the language that you're talking to the community, and you don't have to alienate them. You have to create that critical space and a safe space, which the mayor was talking about, Mr. Gassetti, whereby they can feel comfortable to talk to you. So we created that format, and we've achieved some success.
It's amazing work, and I actually think that everybody needs a round of applause, because it is incredibly important what you've done. Can I ask you, what do you feel has been your biggest challenge in getting this work off the ground? What is stopping you from doing the work in the optimal possible way? Scale.
I want to scale up. I speak through the International Visitor Leadership Program through the State Department. I'm a State Department speaker at large, which any embassy in the world wants a workshop, I will be there. I don't charge for what I do. I'm old school, God and country. You know, we believe in that value, God and country, for God and for your country. My God is Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And our country is America. So we speak to people from all across the world, and they say, Mohamed, we like your platform. It's simple, it's easy, it's cheap. How can you help us do the same thing? Whether it's in Ramallah, in Israel, or Timbuktu. I know somebody from Timbuktu, for God's sakes. We share the same issues, the same concepts. It's just that locally it's different, and I wanted something to do locally within the community where they can empower themselves and go about creating this messaging, where they can compete online, but more importantly, offline, where they can go into the communities and speak about these issues. Create that framework where you start forcing your community to do critical thinking. Critical thinking is an important part, where we force the kids to think about this issue from point A to point B, where we're trying to get them to point Z, which is extremism is wrong. So the biggest, if I'm Superman, my kryptonite is resources. We are resource starved. When I say we are resource starved, a lot of people talk about this stuff. You can't go a day on TV without seeing somebody who's an expert talking about it, whether it's within our government or foundations. But when it comes to foundations on our government opening up their checkbooks to resources, it doesn't exist. Now, I'll give you an example. It cost me $1,500 to create a message. It cost me $3,500 to get 250,000 views on it, 250,000 Muslim eyeballs on it. It cost me 7 cents, 7 cents from process beginning to the end to get a narrative out there. 7 cents. A bullet cost 30 cents. A bullet costs 30 cents. And that is very expensive if you're waiting to react to the problem, whether it's in San Bernardino or in New York the other day. It is very, very expensive. But it is pennies on the dollar going out there and doing prevention. Our government gets it, but they don't get us. That's a big problem. Foundations get it. But then again, because of the controversy of the issue, they don't get us. And that is a big issue. We need to scale up. Al-Qaeda creates 3 videos a month. ISIS creates 12 videos a month. ISIS spent $500,000 getting on a camera which can compete with Hollywood right down the street. They can compete with them in terms of production capability. And we can't seem to get that 7 cents commitment to do our work globally. We work locally in terms of grassroots. I am a grassroots activist. I feel very comfortable in the mosque and in the schools rather than this location. But then again, we need to scale up. And in the sense of scaling up is resources. Without resources, we're sitting there in the water. I can get 10,000 views organically, but to get that view, to get to compete with ISIS and Al-Qaeda in propaganda value, we need resources.
So let me pass now the floor to Adnan, because you've gone from working in government and looking at ways in which you could invest in community initiatives from a government standpoint, and now you're doing that within the private sector space. Now, why isn't this getting more support? Or let me change that question. What needs to happen for the private sector to be investing more in the scale challenge of response?
It's a great question, Sasha. And before I answer it, thank you for the work that you've done in the service of this issue. And of course, Errol, having this summit is in itself a great sign of what is possible and what we can do. So I do want to just call out USC and the great staff here for doing this, because it's been a lonely space. It's been an uphill battle. And being part of Gen Next Foundation, it's become, in a way, it's been kind of frustrating because it's even lonelier, because you realize there aren't other foundations doing this work. But then you also see the potential and the possibility of examples that Mohamed is doing and needs to be scaled up. And you realize that there's this mismatch in the marketplace. There's a disconnect. Let me back up for a second. When I was in government, and Mubin, you mentioned this in your earlier panel about the CSCC, the State Department communications entity. Before that, there were 3 other communication entities, 2 of which I helped create, the Global Strategic Engagement Center. They all had fancy government names. And I love government, but they're ineffective. They don't have the innovative spirit, the risk-taking. They don't have the ability to evolve as quickly as everyone in this room can. They don't have the ability to take on new technologies and incorporate them as quickly as it needs to happen. They have interagency processes. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they don't have interagency processes. They're very straightforward. They do what they need to do and they get it done. And that's a real disadvantage to government. And so when I was in government, it was really a problem of solutions looking for, or resources looking for solutions that did not exist. In the private sector, we have a lot of solutions that are looking for resources that often are very, very difficult to connect with those solutions. And what I've discovered, there are sort of 2 pillars. One is the funding side, which is important, but there's also a capacity issue. There's an innovation issue. And for example, Gen Next Foundation, we're a group of more than 300 entrepreneurs, passionate entrepreneurs who've been very successful in their businesses and have unleashed this paradigm of venture philanthropy into this space, and believe in the power of innovation and believe in the power of society to be able to find solutions to these problems. Because ultimately, when we talk about shifting the narrative, it's a communications failure that we're dealing with. It's an inability to take charge of the conversation in a way that we can protect our young people from groups like Al-Qaeda, groups like ISIS, who are 24/7 mixing and sending propaganda out there and targeting it to the right eyeballs. Now, with a group like Gen Next, I've found that when we do find a good idea, Mohamed, what you've been able to achieve, ISD, what you've been able to achieve, Sasha, and AVE, these are all programs that we invest in. Those are fantastic. But there are 1,000 more opportunities out there that don't have the capacity. They don't have the connection to technology. They don't have the networks that they need to be able to evolve. They don't have the expertise. They have the passion. There's a lot of passion out there, but they don't have the know-how. Mohamed, you were lucky to connect with Errol and get this going on a different level. Now you're at the point of scaling. That is a step beyond what most organizations, most NGOs are dealing with. They're nowhere near the level where you are, because they're still trying to figure out the expertise piece and the technology piece. So the way I see it, Sasha, is that there's a hunger out there, but there just isn't enough of that connection. And organizations like Gen Next help make those connections. We bring the right people to the table. When needed, you bring resources. But it's really a big part of it is just connections and bringing the expertise to the table.
It's interesting. You said other philanthropy is not in this space. That's right. I mean, we've seen that there's a real challenge with getting traditional foundations, the foundation sector, into this space. Now, part of that is that they think government's doing this. And yet we have a brand problem around government investment. Is that right? Can you say something about what it means to get government money and do this work at a community basis?
Right now, as it stands, taking government money is a dirty thing because of the terminology surrounding how you take the money. If you use the word Islamic radicalism, you've lost me, you've lost my community. It's that simple. My community feels stigmatized, it's alienated, and dealing with the government is actually seen as a negative rather than a plus. So when I came to this conference, the first thing I noticed is the wording, homegrown violent extremism. That is as generic as it is. I don't use the word terrorist anymore, I use the word intolerance. Because at the end of the day, the kids, when we talk about terrorism, they are fatigued. This is a generation that grew up with extremism on their mind, on the headlines, every day. Every day. So whenever you talk about extremism and terrorism, what they do is they automatically shut down their minds. They say, he's one of them. He's just going to come here and tell us we're the bad people. So what we do understand is government has a role. If anyone says government doesn't have a role, then they're blind to our history. How we worked against the fascists, how we worked against the communists. VOA, Voice of America, was a creation exclusively created to do that. And it still exists to date. Now, what we do know is without government, there's no scaling up compared to non-governmental organizations. That's why we volunteer at the State Department with the International Visitor Leadership Program, where other people come from around the world and we sit down and we talk and we come up with solutions. Now, without government, this is not going to happen. With government, we need a proper definition. Definitions matter. Whether you can alienate the people or put them in the same tent. I prefer putting people in a big tent. The bigger the tent, the better off you are. The more stakeholders you have, the better off you are. And our government does a good job with that, the local government. I just came from last week, a meeting with the DHS, Roundtable, Civil Rights Department, held in a mosque. In a mosque. The mosque invited them, hosted them, provided the food, and said, this is what our community needs to hear. The FBI does the same thing with outreach. The Department of Police, Minneapolis Police Department, and the Sheriff's Department, and the St. Paul Police Department do the same thing within the community. So institutions that have been around for years, they get this. And they do a good job at it. So what we need is ability for government to start thinking along a Marshall Plan. Start saying, look what works. We can't do everything. But they can do something. I can do the messaging part. And the others who can do the mental health part, the social work, or other issues. We put a man on the moon, but we can't seem to get together this group of people in the same room. And that is amazing. That always amazes me. That other nations have figured this out, and they're working on it, while we are trying to still define what the issue is, even after September 11.
It's still a very fragmented space.
Yeah.
And we see this both within civil society, so there's a lot of very small players not able to connect the dots, often not with the strategic capabilities, technological capabilities, amplification capabilities needed. And we also see a very fragmented space from a policy standpoint. That's what you're saying. And we've experienced this, of course, in many, many different environments. Now, just last point on this government piece, because I think it is important. Mubin, you've been accused of all sorts of things in your life, but
only half are true.
Yeah, only half are true. But just to speak to this point around government support to this space, because it is a big challenge. Right now, it's still the prime source of funding for many, and yet it brings with it a whole host of issues. And when we talk about the narrative, of course, matters. And the undermining of the credibility of intervention providers and community actors is a massive part of the challenge that I think many groups face. Can you speak to that a little bit? How do you overcome that? Are there things that we can do just proactively, positively, to do something about that?
Yeah, so, we were on this, before CVE got famous, right? Watching all these things happen, meeting our great friends from the AVE network, like other formers, like lifeafter8.org. We saw these things coming. What started to happen is it was because of the politicization of terrorism that when governments started to speak about it, it was being done in the wrong way. I mean, if you would have had, messaging experts and positioning statements, whatever, and craft a narrative and do it right, but that's not what happened. And so it became hyper politicized. And then what happened is you have community organizations that are active in this space. They're also active, or they're also vying for influence in the communities, okay? So when one organization is getting funding, the other organization gets jealous. And they become high schoolish all over again. They start to slander people. They say, oh, you're Islamophobic because you want to take CVE money. Now, I always thought, and I fought in the space with all of these people and all of these characters, and what I tried to explain to them is one thing was top-down, government-driven CVE is bound to fail. Nobody even believes that. I don't think anyone here believes that the government is going to prescribe to communities what they should do. Okay, so that's one thing that needs to be said out loud. It follows then that a community-driven effort needs to materialize. And the problem is that you have some in the community who are, they're perpetual naysayers, okay? It's what they are, right? Haters gonna hate, right? So that's all they do. They kibosh and they slam any solution, and they don't provide an alternative solution. They don't give you something else to say, okay, well, this is what we're doing. So just one of the things I've been trying to do is to get community members or activists or whatever they want to call themselves who don't understand really what the subject matter is. For example, we were quickly talking about, you had some who said that radicalization, it doesn't even exist. What? Because radicalization had been applied only to the Muslim community. It was just a condition that brown people develop, right? So one was to educate people, is to say that no, there's a whole scientific field that's still emerging. Yes, it's still emerging. Psychology has been around for 50 plus years as an academic discipline, economics, whatever else. Radicalization is like, what is it? Where does it fit? So educating and informing the people as to what exactly is going on, I think is the first and most important step as to how you start to get away from the slanders, the mischaracterization of what is radicalization, what is CVE, what are all these things. So just to reinforce again that this is a very good platform that we're actually having these conversations. Very similar to what my friend Adnan was saying, that if solutions and resources, well, at least start with understanding what the issue is. Mohamed spoke very nicely, what the needs are, the organizations that are doing what they can do from their particular institutional restrictions. Just like what I said about police, they can only do so much, community can only do so much. So I think that's how we can get over the naysayers in the community.
And then say something about how we could start to mount what I've always felt is needed in this space, which is a kind of private coalition, a partnership of civil society with the private sector, so that we can start to address these issues of scale, and think a little bit about the tools for amplification and and a little bit about the tools in the tech space that could be deployed in this area. A lot of your members, I know, are very successful in exactly those domains.
That's a great question. And I love how you phrased it, the private-private partnership, because as you well know, we all know, in Washington, D.C., or in policy circles, it's all public-private, and that's kind of lost its luster. And it's become incredibly bureaucratic. And as government resources start drying up, which they are, as programs at least at the federal level, start getting shut down, which they are on this issue, increasingly you have a focus on whether it's tech companies working with tech companies, work that you've done a lot of work in this, Sasha, or if it's philanthropies working with philanthropies, and then tech working with philanthropy. So, and then bringing in NGOs. All of this is where the action is now focused. This is how we are evolving as a society. And in my judgment, that is exactly where we need to be. I don't want government defining my culture. I don't want government attaching strings to programming to say, talk about this, don't talk about that, X, Y, Z. And I think government has a role. It's capture, kill. It's up to society to transform the conversation and take charge of the narrative. It's up to society to protect our young people from really dangerous and poisonous ideas. And I think it is up, and we all have specialization. So as a venture philanthropy, Gen Next, our specialization is networking and bringing the right people to the table, connecting the technology to the NGOs, connecting the resources to the NGOs, or whatever is required to come up with the solutions for the problem set. You know, when you're a creative, and it's not lost on me, we're in Los Angeles, when you're a creative and you make films and ads and so forth, you have a role to play. You know, our role is to connect you with the right resources, with the right expertise, the management expertise, the capacity. That is, and I'm excited about that. I think that is exactly where we all need to be. But there's this big mismatch, this elephant in the room. Because everywhere we go, and we talk to donors and we talk to potential donors all the time and experts, there is a sense that government's taking care of this. Okay? It's being handled. It's a counterterrorism issue. It's a big security issue. There's that city that we've just taken back in Syria. You know, there's a fight. The military is on it. And boy, you talk to anyone in the military and they will tell you, you cannot kill your way through this. They can win the battlefield, the physical battlefield. There's got to be focus placed on the war of ideas. And we are not doing that. We have not been doing that. And even the commanders will tell you that they have a role to play, and then society and the private sector have a role to play. And I think it's just a matter of really that dawning on more and more people. And forums like this, where you actually have the people and the resources and the networks to come together and make things happen.
And that's exactly our experience. If it's a security problem, it has to be dealt with by the security apparatus
Yes.
of a state, whether domestic or international. And yet, kinetic response is never going to deal with the recruitment part of this challenge. That pipeline doesn't go away. And if we don't get ahead of the curve, here we are. This is fundamentally a social challenge. And as a social challenge, we need a reframing. The work that you've done with gangs in terms of looking at this from a public health perspective is fascinating. And until we can think about a frame that mainstreams this domain, until we can understand this as a social challenge that happens across different groups at different times, we won't, I don't think, get to a place where we can upscale and mainstream our response. I think this is absolutely vital. And if we can send that message, I think coming from here is very important. The other thing that's clear to me, having worked now in this space for over a decade, is that there have been an enormous amount of innovative endeavors. Things that have been tried and tested, some of which have failed, but some of which have shown genuine promise. And I can see, friends, faces here, people who have been at the vanguard of piloting some of that work. And we've been investing in those experiments in many cases and learning from those experiments. And we've done this from a data-driven perspective so that we can say, okay, here's what actually works. We've got some data to show it. And there's a lot of interest in trialing those things here and there on a small scale, but I haven't seen the interest in then saying, okay, this works. Now, scale. How do we do this? So I think we're in agreement here. We've had a lot of meetings about this. This is really important that we get those messages across now. I've got an anonymous question from our audience here. It's fascinating.
Who did it?
I have lots to say about anonymity online and the problems that generates for us, but I'm sure this is going to be very useful. Yes, how do we measure success in the counter-radicalization space? Either by efforts by government or by NGOs. This is very important. And I think this speaks to some of the issues, Adnan, that you raise in terms of investment in this space. Everybody wants to understand what is the impact, how do we measure it, where's the data? Do you want to start on this? And then I'd like to actually, I'm going to ask Mohamed to say something about this, because I know that you've been asked this question over and over again, and you've had to respond over and over again to this in order to get even the smallest bit of investment in what you do. Do you want to say a little bit about how you measure success?
For me, it's simple. Online, how many eyeballs? 1 million people. That's how many people have seen messages, straight up messaging. Nothing more, nothing less. 1 million people on a budget of less than $50,000, of which half of it was paid from my own pocket. Like I said, I was doing this because I was pissed. And when I'm pissed, I do something. You know? I hate this ideology, so it comes natural to me. But how do you measure success in terms of offline? We do intakes and outtakes. That's something I learned from Errol. He says, Mohamed, once you're done talking to the kids, find out what they're thinking. I said, cool. How do you do that? He showed me a 10-point way to do it, and I started implementing it. So guess what? 7 out of 10 kids say they find value in the message we deliver, whether it's about identity, whether it's about anti-Semitism, whether it's about racism, Islamophobia, or extremism. 7 out of 10 kids say this message that we talked about in the classroom or in the mosque or at the youth center or at the park or at the library has impacted their lives, and they will use it. But only 2 out of 10 kids have actually said they will ever go look for these messages. That's 2 out of 10 kids will ever go out there and look for these messages and this narrative. And then 10 out of 10 kids have seen ISIS or Al-Qaeda videos. That's the reality. The competition is way ahead of us. That much I can tell you. But we measure our success by amount of how much critical thinking we force our youth to have to discuss this issue. Look, when I get in a room and when the kids come into the room, it's like Professor Errol Sada said, it's like the school shooting. We hear about it, we know it happens, but do you think any parent talks to their kids about being a school shooter? It's the same thing with extremism. No parent in my community thinks their child is going to become a jihadi. No parent. They say, look, they're going to school, they're pious, they're doing the right thing, they're not joining gangs, they're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. But here's another side to them. So when we walk into a room and we start talking about this extremism, we're the first people to ever talk to them and ask them for their opinions. And the questions come. And the questions come. And these kids are smart. If you think they're not engaged, you're wrong. They keep up with the world events, from foreign policy to wars to civil rights issues. And they're very active. So what we do is we redirect them. I base my premises on 3 things. The value of peace, fundamentally. We're Muslims. When we greet each other, we say, Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. That is a very fundamental value that we promote at every junction. The second principle we promote is democracy. So whenever they talk about the issues affecting of victimization or ideology, we push them back again to democratic values. What are you going to do? Are you going to write a letter to your senator? Are you going to join a non-profit organization? Are you going to do a food drive to help alleviate the problems you're talking about? How do you do it? In other words, empowering the youths. And the third part is promoting our government institutions. Look, our government sucks. I'll be very plain with you. But then again, it sucks the least compared to the rest of the world. The system we have may not be perfect, but at the end of the day, it's better than what we see in the rest of the world. So what we do is we say, look, when it comes to extremism, we don't have a choice. There's no daylight between us, the government and us. And I sat down with the FBI agents, and they said, Mohamed, our goal is to create 0 terrorism acts and 0 terrorism cases. I say, dude, that's what my community wants too. So we have a point of engagement, And we take their message and we take it to the community. But that's not the only thing. We also take our message from the community back to the government, and we sensitize them. So how do we measure success? Engagement. We measure success by eyeballs. How many hits we got? We measure success by outtake. How many people have found value in our message? In other words, we've gone scientific about this. So that is how I measure success with average Mohamed.
And I think there's something to be borrowed again from the public health space here. There have been major campaigns and investments in attitudinal and behavioral change in the public health domain. Not to mention, of course, the marketing space. Again, huge amount of investment into tech marketing tools. We've borrowed heavily from some of those tactics and methodologies to look at ways in which we can amplify civic responses to this problem at a granular basis, but in a scaled way. And many of the tools that we've looked to deploy in support of civil society organizations that are doing this work are readily available, of course, for all of us, but they are readily available, of course, in the commercial sector to sell us Coca-Cola, and in the political sector. Please, sir.
In terms of measuring success and the private-private, you know, Mohamed, how do you bottle him? Because isn't it likely that a great deal of the success comes from his own personality, from the evident truth?
How do we, so the Clone Mohamed project.
Very simple. That's what I've been thinking about all this time. Look, my organization is called Average Mohamed. The main reason why I use the word average Mohamed because I'm just an average guy. Nothing spectacular about me. And then Mohamed is the most common name in the world. Now, how do we duplicate this process? I learned it through, I found out, look, whenever there's a problem, and whenever you hit caps or ceilings, you start figuring out how to overcome it. So through the International Visitor Leadership Program, through the State Department program, I found out that basically the topics we're covering is covered as the same issue in Marseille or Timbuktu, just different local dynamics and tweaks. So how do we do this? Well, I'm having a problem finding resources. Simple, franchise. How do we franchise this process? I have over 50 organizations from Ramallah to Timbuktu who are ready, willing, and able to do the same work. Repurpose my messages into the local dialect, whereby we speak in the same language, whether it's in Niger, Nigeria, Mali, Somalia, or Yemen, or even in Iraq and Syria. Now, they want to do the same work, and then we show them how to make the counter-narrative. We tell them what the narrative is. More importantly, what not to say. We have experience in that. Because it is as important to know what not to say to your community in order to engage them. How do you go about engaging it? Now, it is simply, it can be franchisable and it can be replicated. The third aspect to it is now the offline. When it comes to offline, you teach them. Everything is taught. Look, it takes an idea to defeat an idea. Once you have the idea, then you go about propagating it. It is simple. Once you have a platform with which to start with 60 seconds, and then you go about breaking it down what those 60 seconds say, and you engage the youth with them, and you force them to do critical thinking, and you have the responses, guess what? You're having an impact. So this process is franchisable. And this, I spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure that one out, because at the end of the day, if I'm having resource issues, maybe others around the world may not. All I can do is scale them up. Scale up this process.
And those networks are vital. And I agree with that. I do believe that there's scalable content here. And I'll come back to that in a second, but I wanted to ask you, Mubin, you do a lot of direct intervention work and engagement. Is that scalable? So from the upstream, in some sense, in terms of broader counter-messaging and narrative and positive messaging, through to the further downstream work around direct interventions and exit programming, can you be cloned?
It's funny. I testified at this Homeland Security, Governmental Affairs and Homeland Security Committee, and the senator actually said the same thing. Can we clone you? Peter Bergen wrote an article about 5 things to do, and he actually said one of the things is to support the work of. So why did I do? I'm not getting paid for it. Okay, I got no penny for it. I got grief and stress and death threats every few minutes or hours. I did it because I have a commitment to Islam, to my religion, to what these people are doing. If they can put in all that time and I can't put in half the effort, then I shouldn't be waving my Islamic flag everywhere, right? If you can't take care of your things at home, my dad jokes about this all the time. I mean, he says that you can't run your mosques properly, and you want to run civilizations. You want to have a caliphate to run entire countries. It doesn't work like that. So I think it can be done. I like the franchising or even boot camp approach. So I'm just throwing an idea out there, right? So one of the things I had was, all right, you get young people, you know, talk to Dell. Okay, I don't know, I have no business dealings with Dell. I'm just giving a, and you tell Dell, you know what? We're doing this great youth empowerment program. We're going to bring like 150 kids. We're going to put them through a 5-day boot camp on online safety and online whatever. You don't call it counter messaging, reprogramming. You don't call it that. Online safety. You're going to give these kids, at the end of their thing, we're going to present them with this brand new computer or brand new laptop that's going to have all the bells and whistles on it. We're going to give you a nice certificate saying, look at all these wonderful kids you helped. And you're going to drill those kids on a whole host of things, one of which is counter messaging. I think that's very easily done. I don't think it takes a lot of money. I think there are even community organizations that already have competencies and like capability that they're, so you have Muslim organizations, you know, where our funding model is terrible. It's outdated, right? Like it's based on shame again, right? Like, oh, if you don't donate, you know, we're going to lose our thing. And, you know, you really got to. So you have Muslim organizations that already have programs that they're running by volunteers, people who feel passionate, who love their people, who love their religion, who love society. And what you need to do, or what we need to do, I think, is just to remobilize these volunteer networks that already exist. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to pay people to do this stuff. I mean, you know, it can be done.
So I just want to give maybe 2 or 3 examples of scalable programming in this space. Forgive me, I'm abusing my chairing role here, but since it's a conversation. The stories that we heard on the panel this morning of former extremists, we felt were extremely important and poignant and important. I mean, getting each of these people into every school in America or every school in the world, of course, is impossible. And so we developed an audio-visual resource for teachers that brought some of those stories to life in a very emotional way, because you can't fight this through factual evidence or information. It just doesn't work. Every bit of research tells us that. But you can address narrative through emotive connection. And so these are individuals that were brave enough to tell their personal stories of being affected by extremism, either as former extremists or as survivors of extremism. We worked with educational partners then to develop a set of resources, guides for teachers to use that content interactively in a classroom setting. It's also available online, it's free. We can do that sort of thing, but we need then to be able to market that better, get that out to schools better. We need it to be localized, we need it to be, and so on. But there is good data to show that it has an impact with the users. A little note of hope in terms of scale. One of the most extraordinary things that we found happened when we brought this program to a school in London, actually the school where Jihadi John was that 6th form kids, these are older 16, 17-year-old kids who had been delivered the program, said, actually, I want to teach this. This is an amazing program. I want to be able to do this for younger kids. And they took on the program, and it became a peer delivery model, where kids were then using this content with other kids. And lo and behold, it was a whole lot more impactful than when the teachers did it. And peer-to-peer models of engagement are, we believe, absolutely the way that you need to go on this. So there's a lot of potential there. On the direct intervention side of things, we've worked with so many, again, of formers, of individuals who have great legitimacy and authority in this domain. And we developed a semi-automated identification methodology online to spot people who are openly supporting extremist groups, white supremacist and Islamist, as well as expressing violent sentiment. You can do that with social listening tools available, again, very readily, although they are expensive. And you can do that with network analysis tools, again, readily available, but expensive. And we applied this methodology, and we found over 40,000 individuals on the sharp tip of the radicalization spectrum. we piloted one-to-one interventions with these individuals, matching up first on an ideological basis former extremists within our network with those people, but also then expanding our intervention provider pool to include counselors that we trained and to include survivors. The results of this have been astounding in that they point to a real appetite and a real potential here. So just under 30% of the people we essentially cold called in this way responded. And depending on which ideological grouping, between 65 and 71% of those individuals remained in a sustained engagement with our intervention providers. And by the way, counselors were as successful, in fact, more successful in sustained engagements than the other groups. And so there are ways in which to scale this work. Now, we're working with partners to look at how do we scale that from a technological standpoint. We've just been looking at the way in which botnets have been used by, we think, mainly Russians in the context actually not just of misinformation and disinformation, but in supporting the far right. And there is an absolutely clear overlap between Russian botnets and the success of the AfD in Germany in the elections that we've just seen. Far right support. Why aren't we doing this? So again, I come to the question of innovation and technology now, just to finish us off there, because when we think about scale, why aren't we doing more to leverage the great talent that we have sitting next door here in Silicon Valley, sitting right here in the communication space? What will it take for us to mobilize those talents for this end? Anybody from the audience that wishes to come to me on that one would be great, but over to you, Adnan, to start us off on that.
I think just, you framed it so perfectly, Sasha, but really and as much as I would love to clone Mubin, we don't have that cloning technology, unfortunately. But what we do have are networks like the Against Violent Extremism Network. It's an organization that Gen Next and Sasha and Google Ideas helped create 5 years ago. Scaling it, telling those stories, getting those stories out there, having that storytelling, getting into schools, getting in the right platforms, getting in front of governments, which you do a lot, getting in front of the United Nations, getting in front of corporations, telling them that these are authentic voices and this is what they're saying, and really, back to the theme of this panel, shifting the narrative. One person at a time, but shifting, hopefully more than one person at a time, but shifting the narrative and showing people that there are alternative pathways, that there are other things going on. I remember, Sasha, I'll be very quick, but I remember, and you will remember this too, many years ago people would decry Twitter. Say, oh my gosh, Twitter is awash with awful, awful propaganda. What do we do? What do we do? Well, we should be creating 90,000 pieces of really good propaganda per day to counter whatever Al-Qaeda is putting out there. I mean, give me a break. That is you don't match hate by creating more and more and more. What you do is you be strategic. You put the right messages out there and you inspire others to create their own messages. You do it organically. AVE has done that. I think our other venture, Redirect, in the online space is starting to do that. You're starting to see information permeating the online space in a way that it has not done before. And all we've done is used online targeted marketing techniques. We use it to sell shoes. We're now using it to sell nonviolence. And that's the kind of ingenuity and the kind of creativity people need to see and need to be a part of to know that there is a whole other paradigm. So what you see on, and I'm not singling out Fox or MSNBC, but what you see on broadcast television, that's not necessarily reality. I said both.
So there's a question here. I think we'll end on that before going to your wonderful PSA, because that will, I think, close us down on an uplifting note, which will be important. Just this question around how we deal with the online space. Now, you've mentioned some of the responses that we saw to the proliferation of extremist content and radicalization recruitment online. where do we draw the line between the notion of privacy online and the government's need to take down extremist propaganda? What is the private sector's role? That's one of the questions that's come from the audience. Now, do you want to say a word about this, and then I'll pass it to you?
Yeah. After I slammed Twitter, right?
Yeah.
I think, I mean, government and private space and academics and activists, whatever else, they went through this, they argued it out. I think we all, I mean, it's a whack-a-mole approach, right? I mean, you take down a server here, it goes up somewhere else, and the message is back online. You take the account down, it goes back up online, whatever. So it will come down to private corporations. These corporations, they have terms of service. If you violate those terms, you should be kicked off. You know, I'm trying to be diplomatic and polite. I'm saying this out loud to control myself. And Errol told me to behave every time I came up here. So I don't understand for the life of me why they couldn't do this, okay? They could have made it very clear, nope, you do this, you're off. They knew if you posted a beheading video, you were gone. So you know what? They stopped posting beheading videos. Of course, they would suck you in and get you in through other means, but they realized what their boundaries were. Once the people started to say on Twitter, oh, well, it's freedom of speech. You can debate freedom of speech till you're dead if you want. I don't believe terrorists should be given freedom of speech. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm radical in saying that. There's no need. They don't need freedom of speech. So there's a line, there's borders which you can very clearly define and say if you cross those borders, you're off. And right now it just seems to be a complete wild west of ideas. Maybe that's a good thing, I don't know. But I want to just leave it with this. There are two images that stick out in my head and I use on my slides in my presentation. One is a very recent one. It's got ISIS, or a guy who looks like ISIS, and it looks like a little pipe that goes from the top of his head, it goes around and drops down, and it says, ISIS, this is an ISIS recruiting thing or in-your-face thing. They say, we will get into the internet, we will get onto the internet and into your children's brains and we'll radicalize them at home. There's a picture of this, I have it on my phone. And the second picture I use is, you know, in an ammunition belt, you have multiple rounds that are connected together. Well, there are what appear to be 3 rounds, like what you guys call bullets, or not bullets. Bullets are the business end of a round. Well, one is a pen, the other is a bullet, and the third is a USB drive. And it says, Jihad, lahu shaklun akhar, al-muhim Allah tatruk makanak. The jihad has multiple forms, and the important thing here is that you don't forget your place in it or your role in it. So whether you're the writer, whether you're the shooter, whether you're the USB user, media producer, you all have a role to play. So I'm going to leave it at that, just the role that everyone has to play. Social media organizations as private corporations need to get their act together, seriously. Thank you.
That's absolutely perfect, and we're on the dot now to move. Now, can you just tell us a little bit about this piece of content that we're about to see and what you want it to do?
The message is called, basically, the New York incident, where the guy takes a car and runs down people as pedestrians, which we've seen across other countries. The message is about, first of all, what is it? Is it Islamic? It starts with, this is not Islam. And then we quote from the Quran again. The Quran says basically for every person who kills one human being out of mischief or disorder for no other reason, they basically kill all humanity. And the role is to go ahead and supplement and encourage people to talk about this, meaning that there's always been somebody who knows something or who sees something, but they feel that it's not their place to say something. So if you see something, say something. And I promote the police department because I wanted to use the FBI, but the police is more generic across the world. This message is in English, which plays in Britain, Canada, and anywhere else. And the goal is to say, look, when it comes to our faith, we're not neutral. You have a space, and the space is if you see something, say something. Because we don't believe in this as Muslims. And then we ask, the last part of it is interactive. Like I said, offline stuff. Basically, we're asking, what do you think? Do you agree with this statement or do you disagree with this statement? We want to hear about you. And kids will give us responses to what they think about it, whether they like it, they don't like it, so that we can better learn how to do this again better. But the message is very straightforward. It's 120 seconds. I hope you enjoy it. Let me see if I understand this right. I get in my car, find pedestrians, run them down. Run down Becky, a mother of 3 kids. Run down Smith, who volunteers at a homeless shelter. Tyrone, a teacher who loves kids. Aisha, who believes in Allah. Why not? He was in the way. Lee, who stood up against genocide for Rohingya Muslims in Burma. Rajput, who employs Muslims in his internet company. If you think heaven is what you get, think about this. That whoever kills a soul, unless for a soul or for corruption done in the land, it is as if he had slain mankind entirely. And whoever saves one, it is as if he had saved mankind entirely. Quran, chapter 5, verse 32. Report those attempting to kill the world over and over again. Think about it. You will have saved all mankind. If you see something, say something. Peace up. Extremist thinking out. Like I said, the religion is not neutral. We know how to talk. We know the talk. We just need to be scaled up. Hopefully, I'm talking to the right people.
So I think I'd like to end on just a sort of a call to arms, a little plea. We've seen incredible programs and work being done on the previous panel, and Tony and Angela have been at the forefront of this space well before anybody wanted to even clock the existence of a far-right, genuine sort of growing far-right extremist problem. And we've seen brave and important work being done here. Mubin and Mohamed have been at the front line for so long. Amazing things being done. Now, with the Gen Next Foundation really coming in as a fairly solitary player in the foundation philanthropic space, we're all in this community, and I'm amazed at how badly we've organized ourselves over the last decade. We all have a responsibility to find a way to upscale this work. So I just wonder if, coming out of this event, can we collate everybody's mail in here and go collectively, not competitively, collectively together, to raise the sort of support and investment this needs? We need to create the tools, the infrastructure for the professionalization, for the upskilling and the upscaling of this work. We need to draw those tools from the private sector. We know what they are. We've tried them, we've tested them, we've A/B tested that, and we know where this needs to go. But there is no button you can press without the genuine social mobilization of credible individuals who stand within their own communities and understand the problem from inside out. There is no substitute for that. And that requires resourcing, as does the amplification. So I sit here now, decade after, also frustrated that we're not doing more to coordinate our efforts. And so I say here, a call to arms, please. Whether it's everybody putting their card in a bucket, and I promise we will follow up. And Errol, I know you are going to lead the charge, but we need to find a way in which we organize this space. Horses for courses. Everybody has a constituency that they can get, that they are best able to engage. Everybody has a capacity that they are uniquely positioned to utilize. Everybody has a resource in some shape or form that we need to be deploying, but we need to do it in a strategic way. The strategy piece is missing when we talk about measuring successes, because actually we're not very good at setting the objectives very clearly. Market by market, city by city, what is the change that we want to achieve within what time frame? And then let's collectively get around those objectives and let's measure ourselves against them. That would be my call to arms. So I finish there, Errol, if that's the right time.
Just again, Sasha, Mubin, Adnan, Mohamed, it's an incredible panel. Thank you for your insight. Mubin, I would never tell you to behave. I like you unfiltered. That's how we are. But again, another round of applause for this incredible panel. So what I'm going to do here before I break you for lunch is just, again, echo what Sasha has just said. You know, we're all here today, but as we were planning this for the last 2 years, it wasn't about November 14th. It was about what happens on November 15th and what we do tomorrow. So today I've got you here. I've got an incredible audience online and in social media that's following us today. Engage us. We have an opportunity for you to send in comments, send in questions. What do you want to see happen next? But most importantly, network, as Sasha mentioned. You know, some of us are meeting for the first time, but we've spoken to each other for years, and you're in the room with people now. Make that happen. One of the things we did not want to have today was a Kodak moment. That's not what this is about. We really are trying to be action-oriented and results-driven.